Thank you very much for joining me. I'm meteorologist Brian Shields, watching a couple areas out there. We've had this spin right on top of central Florida. It's not as super organized, it's not a name system, but as that moves offshore, it may get a name, and then this spot in here that I was talking about yesterday could flare up further. The western Gulf of Mexico, the Bay of Campeche, it is an area that is going to be conducive for some development as we work forward in time. So this here, there's a little bit of a spin here. Now the water is very warm in here. You have the Gulf Stream, so it's a stream of very warm water, a current of very warm water, and this could feed off that. So there is a brief opportunity for this to develop into a tropical storm. Now, if it were to become a tropical storm, it would be moving away from the Carolinas, the Bahamas, Florida, and Georgia, all moving away. But if something develops, it could get a little bit closer to Bermuda by late on Friday. So watching that. But in the short term, some heavier rain parts of Cuba, the Bahamas, back through Florida, especially South Florida, where we've been inundated with some rain the last few days. And we could get an additional 6 inches plus, or 150 millimeters plus of rain, anywhere from extreme western Cuba up through Florida, back through the northern Bahamas. Then there's a sharp drop off, but then this system will start to build offshore where it may spin a little bit more, get better organized, and it could become a named system. Now this here, not super typical for this time of year. Here's the coast of Africa. This is a tropical wave coming off, and you get those. That's normal. But the fact that there's such a big flare-up of rain and storms with it is not super typical. They're hanging together a little bit more. Now this will weaken some, but I'll watch it as it marches off toward the west, because eventually that moisture will be pulling toward the Caribbean. But a little unusual to see something that healthy out there, so to speak, this time of year. Now, here's Cuba, the Bahamas, here's Florida, here's this area here that's going to bring some areas of heavier rain again, a lot like we had yesterday. You can see the rain here. Now, by tomorrow, it'll move offshore. This is when it could spin up. The models kind of go back and forth on that. Conditions are marginal. I'll get into that in a second for it to spin up, but there is a chance it does flare up into a tropical storm as it moves away from the southeast U.S. and moves away from the Bahamas. But the longer term picture will be leftover moisture around from the Bahamas, South Florida, Cuba, back toward the Yucatan of Mexico. And you see this moisture here. This is going out in time into Saturday. This is the next area to watch, because this moisture is going to be building in the Gulf of Mexico, and that's where something could eventually spin up. The National Hurricane Center picking up on that as well, saying, hey, this spot, watching this over here, that's the one moving out of Florida. But also this area here, and a lot of the models are picking up on the possibility of a tropical storm developing. Now, if one were to develop, the early signs are to kind of drift either back toward Mexico or Texas, or kind of slide up to the north. That would keep it over toward the western Gulf, but something to watch. Now, in the short term, the spin on top of Florida is dealing with a lot of wind shear, so conditions are not conducive for development. That's why it's not a named system, and it's not super windy. We're just dealing with the rain with it. But as it moves offshore, it's still going to deal with the wind shear, but then it taps into the very warm water of the Gulf Stream, and that's why, despite the wind shear, it does have a chance of developing. Now, we look over here in the eastern Pacific, we could also see a buildup of moisture. So in the eastern Pacific, the hurricane season started May 15th, and there's been no named storm yet on the eastern Pacific side, but that's another area to watch. The National Hurricane Center also painting in that area. So western Gulf down here, and then back toward the eastern Pacific, a couple spots to watch. So it is clearly getting more active. So we've got that tropical disturbance bringing rain to Florida, the Bahamas, parts of Cuba, and flooding rain at that. It could develop as it moves offshore, and then we'll be watching the rain on the backside of that, as I was just showing you, building in the Gulf of Mexico. And that's where a tropical storm could build up. The early thinking is western Gulf back toward the Bay of Campeche. We should see signs of that this weekend, and then it could develop into a named system by early next week. June, on average, gets one named storm, and there are a couple areas we are watching out there now. The first name in the Atlantic Basin will be Alberto, so if something does develop into a tropical storm, the first one would be Tropical Storm Alberto. I'll keep you posted. I hope you're doing well. Have a good rest of your day.